Okay, everyone, I'm back. Now, I just talked about Sally's romance, or could have been romance, with Griff the goat from the Sonic SatAM first season episode Warp Sonic. I think that's the name of it. And as I mentioned, after discovering what Griff had done by stealing the Power Stone to help power his city, Sally kind of, she understands probably why he did it, but in a way starts to slowly, in a way, calls that relationship off before it even gets started. Now, we head into the comic books from there. We head into the comic books from there, and what happens next is really, really an interesting concept, and I agree with a lot of people, it's very entertaining. But first of all, let's start out with Knuckles. Now, some people say that she's flirting with Knuckles, and she, has a crush on Knuckles, and she's doing this to make Sonic jealous. Excuse me. That's not the case. You see, I know from personal experience that as a young kid, if you have a few girls that are your friends, yeah, you might have a crush on them and everything, but it doesn't mean anything. You can have a crush on them, they can acknowledge it, but the way that you look at them and the way they look at you, all it is friendship. As a matter of fact, the way one of my female friends once told me, we looked at each other as brother and sisters. That's how we looked at each other. And that's exactly how Sally and Knuckles are. The more like the the more like a sibling friendship. In other words, the more like they look at each other as brother and sister. Sister. That's what it is. I mean, even though they're friendly with each other, but you gotta understand, they grew up with each other. Anytime Sally's father went up to the floating island to meet with Knuckles' father, he took Sally with him. And thus, because of that, her and Knuckles became fast friends. Nothing more. So, her having a relationship with Knuckles ain't happening. All it is a sibling friendship of being like brother and sister. That's it. Now, we go on to the next relationship, and this one is a doozy. And I talked about this in my Stuck in Traffic video, but this one is a doozy. Jeffrey St. John. Man, you talk about a love triangle that Ben Hurst would have been proud of. I mean, Ben Hurst said in the bonus extras of the Sonic SatAM DVD box set that he had plans of doing a love triangle with Sonic, Sally, and a Freedom Fighter. Well, Ken Penders and some of the other writers took him up on that. I guess not only took him up on that offer, or basically heard about what he was going to do, but made it better than what I think even Ben Hurst could have expected. I don't know if I made any sense there. But what I'm saying is that they took the concept that Ben Hurst was going to come up with and made it into something that entertained people for years. Now, you might ask, how did this get started? Well, it got started at the end of issue, I think it was 18 and 19. I'm not really sure. Can't think of the issues. Issue 19, 18 and 19. I can't really remember. Well, Sally went on a solo mission, and during this solo mission, met up with Jeffrey St. John. Now, these two backup stories, which were her solo mission, led into the Princess Sally three-part miniseries comic, which was released back in the mid-1995. Now, during this whole concept, Sally ended up winning the trust of Jeffrey St. John because Jeffrey was able to reveal to her the plans, Robotnik's plans, of replacing all of the Mobius, all the Freedom Fighters like Sonic and Tails and Bunny and even Sally herself with all these animatronics. Now you might say to yourself, well, wait a minute, why does that sound familiar, animatronics? Well, you go back to the Sonic SatAM Season 1 episode Sonic and Sally, and that's where the idea came from because Robotnik replaced Sally for a time in Knothole with a robotic version of herself. But anyway, what happens is because Jeffrey revealed this plan, Sally and Jeffrey together come up with a different plan. What they do is they prematurely activate the robotic Sally, and thus have the robotic Sally take Sally's place, while Sally, kind of sleeps in the chamber where the robot is. In other words, making Robotnik less suspicious of what's going on until finally they reveal in the end, and to Robotnik, that hey, we were on to you from the very beginning, and thus by doing so, they beat Robotnik, destroy his animatronic plant, and not only does Sally continue to win the trust of officially win the trust of Jeffrey, because like I said, she did, but not only was that trust proven correct for her, but in the end she ends up winning his heart. His heart. And this is kind of paraphrased, kind of quoted in the final panel of the Princess Sally miniseries, where Sally, as she's walking off into the sunset after being kissed on the lips by Jeffrey, basically says what two hearts were, well, actually not one heart was, but where one heart was, there is now two. In other words, what Sally is saying there is where her love for Sonic was, now she also has love for Jeffrey. So in other words, she's kind of in a conflicting moment, although she doesn't look at it like that. As one of my friends said, she's probably just looking for, what kind of guy she'd like to be with. Now, fortunately, her thing with Jeffrey didn't last, but maybe, I don't know, I'm trying to think. I think not even 2 years it didn't last. It didn't last more than 2 years when you look at the issue-wise of the comic book. And in the second Sonic Super Special, which was Brave New World, she tells Jeffrey that she feels she has more love for Sonic than she has for him, and that the only thing her and him can be are friends. Now, some might say that Jeffrey still has feelings for Sally. Well, the reason some might say this is because it's acknowledged back in the issues of around the 80 issues and 70 issues and all that. When Sally is separated by the others, when they go back to school and they're still on missions and all that, and Elias is in charge, before he officially becomes king, he's temporarily put in charge. And what happens is Jeffrey takes advantage of this. Now, what Jeffrey does, though, by taking advantage is, like I said, and I bet some of you would agree, at the time still had feelings for Sally, used this to try to get Sally to himself, because when Sonic would try to go see her, Jeffrey would slam the door. I think there was one issue where he slammed the door basically right in Sonic's face and said, hey, you need an appointment. She is royalty after all. But fortunately, through all this, Jeffrey ends up, becoming a better person even more so, because after a mission, because during a mission, him and his squad are affected by some, I don't know, nanites. They're cleared of them, and then Jeffrey, after he's cleared and everything, realizes that maybe he shouldn't have done what he did. And Hershey is there to comfort him, and thus they end up falling in love, and then later on they end up getting married. And that's a good thing for Sally, because Sally, in the end, around issue 123, ends up going back with Sonic. Now I'll get into that in a little bit. Now, even between all this, Sally's character, though, Sally's character almost wasn't, but basically Sally's character almost wasn't in these issues that I talked about. She almost wasn't in Brave New World. She almost wasn't in the issues where she was separated from her friends. The reason for this was because in the Endgame miniseries, in the first issue of the Endgame miniseries, Ken Penders comes up with the idea to kill Princess Sally off. Now, the reason he comes up with this idea is because Sally's father, the king, was coming back into power. So, to him, it would misplace her. Fortunately, Sega of America caught on to this and said, hey, it's not your call to kill the character off. If it's anybody's call, it's ours. And we don't want her killed off because we have, plans for her. We want you to bring her back. So basically what Ken has to do is rewrite issue 50, and thus, having her dead and probably doing an issue where it's like a memorial issue, Ken ends up bringing her back to life by saying she's in a coma, and then uses the old fairy tale routine of having the hero kiss the princess and thus awaken her from her coma. Now, Sonic and Sally's relationship, now this is almost reminiscing of Endgame, where they finally become boyfriend-girlfriend. And not reminiscing of Endgame, but reminiscing of Doomsday, where they do become boyfriend-girlfriend. Now Sonic Now, Sonic and Sally's relationship is boyfriend girlfriend. I think from certain issues up until, like I say, to the 80 and 90 issues, to where she's separated, and I'll get into that in part three.